I'm ready.
All right, 3,
I'm ready.
2, 1. Welcome to the family, son. Welcome to the 52nd episode of Tuesdays with Moire, or Moire, however you want to put it. And tonight we are doing our first spoopy Halloween episode as we talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Stoker, and Crimson Peak. I'm joined tonight by my wonderful co-host Devin King and our co-host and filmmaker Stephen Beeson. But Devin also does all kinds of music, all kinds of artwork of his own. They're both great creators, and I'm happy to have them here tonight. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Doing well. Glad to be here on a Thursday. What happened there?
Thursdays with Moore made a return because the headset on my mic decided not to work. Sorry, the mic on my headset decided not to work. So I had to use the mic that my mom usually uses for work as a substitute until I figured that issue out. I don't know if it's an issue with the cable, but thankfully it's not an issue with the computer. So thank fucking Christ for that. I don't know what I would have done if it was. So I'm having to substitute. So if my sound quality is a little worse than usual, I do apologize in advance. It is because I'm using a lower grade mic.
Meanwhile, my computer decided to stop working, so I'm stuck on my phone watching these movies.
You sound pretty good for someone on
You're
phone.
watching on your fucking telephone.
You're watching on your fucking phone.
You will be cheated. You will think you have experienced the film,
but you
it is
haven't.
Such a sadness.
I thoroughly agree. Please don't tell Daddy Lynch. I don't want to disappoint him.
Well, he might be watching tonight, so he may be out of luck.
Luckily, the film I had to watch on my phone is one that I did experience in the cinema.
Yes.
Originally, which is the first film I believe we're talking about tonight.
Good segue. Yes.
Good
Thank you.
segue.
One of the films I recommended. Sorry, go on.
Ian, would you like to tell us the theme here tonight?
So the theme here is because we did kind of a Family Matters episode where it was all centered around family members and horror films based around that. And I realized, damn it, we did this episode too early. You know, we should have done this for Halloween. So I figured we do a proper sequel. We do a sequel surrounding horror films or thrillers about family, one way or another, and we open up with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and thankfully not the terrible remake. Steven, you're a horror fan. Would you like to introduce the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Oh, I thought you'd never ask. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. This is the original, as you said, original Texas Chainsaw film. This was written and directed by Toby Hooper, who would go on to direct films like Salem Slot, as well as Poltergeist, in production with Steven Spielberg. This film was it came about from a fantasy that Toby Hooper had one day at a meat market. I believe it was like a grocery store, like a Black Friday event. And there were all of these people trying to get to this meat that was on sale. And feeling disillusioned with the American dream and, in a post-Vietnam era, Toby Hooper started to fantasize about if I just had a chainsaw to get through this crowd. And almost joking, but he collaborated with Kim Hinkle on a screenplay. This film was shot for a measly $80,000, but would go on to gross over $30 million. It was screened annually in several theaters all across the United States. It was a box office smash, very controversial, banned in several countries, as we discussed with films like Censor or The Adjuster. This was one of the original video nasties. This film drew a mixed reception despite its extreme box office success, but it has gone on to become not only a cult classic, but one of the best and most influential horror films ever made. It certainly originated or was the blueprint for films that would come later, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Scream, Nightmare on Elm Street, all of the slasher genres, and really building upon the bricks and the sort of things that Alfred Hitchcock had played around with in Psycho and was being played around with at the time in Italy with the Giallo movement. So yeah, this movie, this is actually the first time that I've seen it.
Me too.
Yeah, but I loved it. This is I thought this film was great. What did you guys think?
Well,
and just a brief plot. Let's do that.
Yeah.
The plot.
What's it about?
This movie is about a group of friends who are traveling through the deep south, and they run across a spooky little house that, against their better judgment, they decide to explore, where a family of cannibals takes them hostage and murders them one by one.
You don't say.
Yes, very, very straightforward plot. There's not a lot of depth here, but it works.
I just wanted to mention real quick, this is Leatherface himself, this infamous killer in the movie, is also based on a real person. Like, he's loosely inspired by Ed Gein, who would murder people and wear their skin over his head, and his entire body, which is just so disgusting and so disturbing. And I figured, like, the opening was total bullshit. It was like, all right, we're just going for Fargo. This isn't actually based on a true story, is it? But then I looked at the story, and I'm like, well, yes, but actually, no. That's loosely inspired by awful, horrible events. But, the whole film does feel like something that could happen. And that's a big reason why this was so effective, and a big reason why other slasher films aren't. But we'll get to that in a little bit.
Well, and that's... Okay, so there's a couple of things about that. Number one, Tobe Hooper came from a documentary background. And so the reason that it feels so real and so, true is that he's coming from this sort of cinema verite kind of, mindset. And he's deliberately trying to make it seem like something that happened or that could have happened. The other thing I think that is to note is that, during this sort of Vietnam era, Tobe Hooper was one of those who is very much disillusioned with the American media and the American government. You got to remember this is 74, so there's Watergate, and there's the Vietnam War, and there's the oil crisis. And so in a lot of ways, he felt like that the government and the media was lying to its people, which, may or may not be happening now. I don't know. But,
right.
No, I'm kidding. But the thing is that, to him, putting that, like, opening crawl of, like, this was inspired by a true story and putting it in the marketing for the poster was, to him, it was like this bizarre joke about how the media sensationalizes and lies to the people.
Well, I think he also...
It's a similar opening text that you see in Fargo, where Fargo straight up lies to you, telling you that it's a real story. Spoilers for Fargo, but in doing so, it kind of changes how you view the film, and it makes you kind of... It has more of a visceral impact if you think of, like, this actually happened, here. Kind of what Man Bites Dog does, saying this happened in your neighborhood. So it's the sensationalism of, how they market the film, which is ironic.
That also reminds me of the film.
Remakes that. Yeah.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it does remind me of the film The Strangers, if you guys have seen that. Because the director went on record and said that was inspired by a true story that happened to him. But then he told the story, and it was like not at all. Let's just say he took some very dramatic liberties with that. It was like not that people actually broke in, but I think there was like, an alarm went off one night and he thought somebody broke in. I mean, I forget the exact. Context.
Sometimes it enhances the story if you provide the inspiration for it, and sometimes just like, oh, you got it from that. That's not. sometimes it adds to it, sometimes it takes away from it. So I think directors can be selective about how they bring up their influences. And another thing that I wanted to bring up with Ed Gein, he was the person that mainly inspired this film, but also I believe inspired Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs.
That's true.
With yep.
Also inspired Psycho, Norman Bates from Psycho, if I'm not mistaken. And there was also another film that I think owes a little bit to Ed Gein, sort of by proxy, which was 1980's Dressed to Kill by Brian De Palma.
You always gotta slip that film in.
I know, yeah, I love that film.
No, it's perfectly understandable.
Yeah,
it's interesting because normally that's something that really bothers me when a film like pretends to be real but actually isn't. Like Fargo was at least silly enough to go like, okay, like that's kind of a joke, I don't take it super seriously, but this movie doesn't take away from the experience at all. Like I wouldn't say it adds to it, but it's not like distracting, like, oh, you're just trying to make this film more edgy and believable and try hard. But the film does go for that documentary style, but doesn't like try too hard. Like I've mentioned this with Man Bites Dog, there's no guy shaking behind the camera to like make it look more realistic, but there really just looks like it's a guy purposely shaking it for no reason. There's no dumb details like that, and it very much has its own style while trying to blend realism in the process.
Well, this is what I wanted to say about the way this film is shot. I think the cinematography is honestly better than it needed to be for this type of film.
For this kind of budget, too.
It's very well done, and I really like the sensibilities of the cinematographer. I screenshotted his name just so I'd remember it, and now I'm pulling it up in my notes just so I read it correctly, because I wanted to give this guy credit, and I'm just talking to pad out the
runtime.
Daniel
No,
Pearl.
but I that's it. So yeah, Daniel Pearl. I really like the sensibilities. Like there's several shots, even just like inconsequential shots where they're on a dolly. They're smoothly panning to track action and zooming the lens. I mean, just the amount of coordination in simple shots like that for the budget that they had for the camera they're using, that's a lot of work and coordinated effort to capture those shots. And you don't really like think about like them, but just to pull that off smoothly like this for this budget. And I think they're using like an Eclair 16mm camera.
Yeah.
I really like how they utilize it. And there's some shots in here that really stand out. Like there's all these dolly shots where there's one that's at such a low angle that it fits right under the swing that the one girl is sitting in.
And then it turns into a long take shot. Like it's really impressive what they had to pull off. The amount of coordination that must have been a pain in the ass to manage.
Well, and it's a good segue because the cast and crew of this film pretty much hated working on it, and that was because all of the raw rotting meat was actually like just it was a practical. It wasn't like an effect. It was practical. Those were real dead rotting carcasses. All of the meat.
Some of them. I think some stuff they had like Fabergé or something to create fake skin.
It had to be fake.
And they even like they had some kind of resin for the bones, but yeah, like some of the blood was real blood from the slaughterhouse.
It was real slaughterhouse blood. The armadillo that you see in the beginning,
that was a real
and
one.
The roadkill, that was real. They had a crew member go off into the road and essentially pick up roadkill to use in shots. And of course, all of this hot summer Texas heat combined with the smelly, rotting meat was a very unpleasant place to be shooting this film. And they shot it over 16 days with the budget that they had.
So it all had to be rushed, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, that goes into they had so much time, not enough time, and they had this shoestring budget. And I mean, some of these shots are incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I particularly thought there was a great sequence with close-ups of a human's eye that just really added to the experience and were just very disturbing and creepy.
Those macro shots, they did a good job. Like they'd have one wide shot, they'd zoom in on the lens, and then they'd have like either somebody pass over the lens, and then they cut to a macro shot, and it just the way they shot and then edited those together made for smooth transitions, and it's really artistically done. In contrast to what the content is, where they're zooming in on someone's tooth, like I don't know. I think this film also started the trope of like the dumb teenagers,
Oh yeah.
because they are, which was probably intentional, and I think they do a good job paralleling. So one argument for this film, or one thing that I think is very clearly drawn a parallel to, is the slaughterhouse, because they're talking about in the beginning how at the slaughterhouses they might take one or two, hits of the hammer to kill them, and the first victim that runs into the house, that's exactly what happens.
Yep.
So
and the next victim too, on top of it.
And
yeah,
it's funny. It's like, and as horrific as it is, because like when he hits him once, his body starts convulsing like he's trying to fight for control. That's a horrific way to go. But I don't know, the timing of it was just funny.
It's kind of funny in a sick way. I get that. It's funny because it's ironic.
I think it's because while watching it a second time by myself, it wasn't as funny as I was when I first saw it. I was really taken aback. I guess when I saw it, it was in the theater, and it was a double screening with Silence of the Lambs. They showed Silence of the Lambs on 35, and then a digital copy of this film. And I think it was just the energy in the room that kind of made that moment funny. But watching it in isolation, it's just horrific.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned, like, the dumb teenagers, and it's probably my only real complaint about the movie. Not, like, they aren't terrible, they aren't obnoxious like they're in Black Christmas, but they're just kind of there. Like, they just kind of exist.
Realistic level of stupidity of, I wouldn't hang out with these people. Like, I felt bad for, I think it's Franklin, who's the guy in the wheelchair, and then leaving him in places. And, like, this guy needs better friends.
Yeah, although... Did you think some of his faces were a little unintentionally funny? Like, that's all I can think of, like, when he's in the car with the creepy guy, and the creepy guy gives a fantastic performance, and I love how awkward everyone else feels, but every time it cuts the fat guy giving, like, the weirdest wide eyes and mouth agape, like, it's like, you're just trying too hard.
Yeah, and you gotta remember, these were all essentially, like, probably theater kids from like Austin.
Oh yeah, Texas. For sure. I don't blame them at all.
No names, and they pretty much all of them swore they wouldn't work with Tobe Hooper again.
That kind of sucks though, because they're kind of putting themselves off of other film projects in the process. But
but
I can't really say I blame them.
16 days of
I can't blame them at all.
Heat and rotting meat, I think you might have all the Hooper you wanted for a while.
You mentioned like how brutal and uncomfortable this film is, but one thing I appreciate about this movie way more than the remake, which I watched clips of the remake, I'm like, wow, glad I never watched that. It's just like how much it pulls back. Like, it shows just enough to disturb you, but it never gets explicit. Like, the first time he kills somebody and convulses on the floor, I expect him to get, like, really brutal, like, he'll chainsaw him in half, or carry, like, the top half of his body, which is basically what happens in the remake. But no, he just slams the door shut, and you're just left with a really silent cut. And you just have to imagine, like, what is possibly happening to this man in the basement.
And I think that works in its favor, because, like, sometimes less is more, where if they show you just enough to shock you, but then they don't linger on it, where it kind of leaves you to the imagination of how all that transpires. That's honestly, I think, a better way to create that horror.
Absolutely. We mentioned this before with Seven, and like the bladed dick scene, and how that was so much more horrifying with the guy explaining it than showing it. It's the same feel here, and yeah, maybe a lot of it was because of the limited budget, but it really ended up making this film so much more effective.
Oh yeah.
Well, that was the other thing that I thought was, I had a similar experience with, is I was surprised at how much of the horror was either implied or psychological in some sense. There's an entire sequence at this dinner table.
Yes.
Where this decomposing corpse of the cannibal family's grandfather, they're trying to put a hammer in his hand.
I thought that guy was dead at first. And I'm like, oh my god, he's alive? Jesus Christ.
I don't think he was very much alive. I mean,
he's barely alive.
Barely alive.
He's more dead than alive for sure. And it's like, apparently for that scene when so they like cut her finger and they make her like feed her blood to him. And apparently like they had like a stunt prop fake blood prepared for that, but it wasn't coming up through the tubes very well, so they just actually cut her finger for it, which is that just makes that thing even more unnerving. Ugh.
Yeah, I know, and I hope they, told the actress they were gonna do that first.
Oh, I'm sure they did, but like, good God.
And I mean, and he's just like awkwardly sucking
that kind of
on
stuff
it.
wouldn't fly today.
Yeah. Back in the 70s, nobody worried about AIDS, so.
Oh Jesus! And
nobody really worried about anything. I mean, it's
everybody
a
was smoking
style
some
of
heavy
filmmaking. Like
everybody was smoking heavy doobies, man. Nobody cared.
When they're trying to give the grandfather the hammer, because apparently he was the best at killing. It would only take one lick, they say. Like the one dad is really gassing him up, but he can't like hold the hammer properly, which is meant to be horrific, and it is. But I think because we grew up with SpongeBob, I couldn't help but think, firmly grasp it in your hand.
Yeah, right. Well, okay, but getting back on track here.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, I mean, it was so. That was honestly one of the most horrific parts of the movie.
Yeah,
that
it's
entire
the best scene. Like
dinner table sequence where they're all gathered around and they've got her tied to this chair,
and she's just screaming constantly.
And she's just screaming, and it's
the last half hour of this movie is screaming. So I had to mute it off because I was watching it with my mother.
But it is so horrific.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly effective.
It's incredibly effective, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And I thought it was interesting.
Go on.
People have talked about a lot of these films, especially with regard to Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, again, Dressed to Kill. Some of these films that draw from the Ed Gein case as somehow like transphobic, which I know is a hot button issue right now, especially with the Dave Chappelle special controversy on Netflix. But I thought it was interesting that in this film, there is one sequence where Leatherface, he basically wears a male face mask of human skin throughout the entire movie, but at the dinner table scene, he's wearing a leather face mask of what appears to be a woman's face.
He's got an apron, right?
Yeah, he's got an apron. And I don't know, obviously I can't speak to how, that's aged as far as, controversy today. But I did think that was an interesting sort of thing, because it almost seems like the filmmaker, who, again, was coming from this place of disillusion and, sort of just contempt for, the American dream and, these sort of things. I almost viewed it in the sense of like he's kind of mocking the nuclear family in a sense. Like he's kind of calling out this idea that, everything's just sunshine and roses in a sense, but really there's this darker underbelly to our sort of culture, And I thought that was interesting because you have these kids who are the dumb teenagers, but they're supposed to be reflective of this like hippie movement. They're all hippy dippy, peace and love. I felt like a little bit.
Fair enough. A little bit.
I think they're definitely from like the East Coast, like not necessarily hippie, but they're definitely.
And so their ideas and their sort of way of life, it almost contradicts and comes into contrast with this very traditional family unit, which is perverted and twisted. And I just think that's an interesting, commentary to sort of explore.
I wouldn't agree on the teenagers being dumb on purpose, but I definitely agree with like it's a breakdown of like the traditional American family and how kind of twisted and warped it becomes, and how like parental abuse can affect an entire bloodline. Like that's what I love most about Leatherface in this. I just want to mention real quick. That's what I love most about Leatherface in this movie, is that like he's not this invincible monster. He's not this creepy, like messed up guy with a huge scar on his face or melted face. Like he's just a guy. Like he's just this broken, like like crazy man that's wearing this mask and is running around with a chainsaw and probably doesn't even understand what he's doing, and it's just tortured and abused all the time. Like, he's terrifying,
like,
but I feel bad for him at the same time.
Yeah, and there's that moment where he, like, puts his hands, like, his head in his hands because he's, like, it's too much sensory overload almost. He's like a child.
He is exactly like a child. I think that's why he does his infamous little dance at the end, because he's like, it's almost like a kid playing around with a toy and spinning it around. Like, this man has no idea what he's doing, and of course, all the sequels and the remakes completely throw that idea out the window. Like, they somehow think that taking away the character's humanity will make him more scary, but it's his humanity that made him scary in the first place.
I was reading that, like, Gunnar Hansen, who's the actor who played him, if you look at him, he kind of looks like Santa Claus, weirdly enough. He's like this Icelandic American actor. You never see him. It's crazy. But, like, he took inspiration from, like, special needs kids, that he figured that Leatherface, this person, grew up with a disability, possibly, you know, autism, but he never learned how to speak properly. That's why he just kind of throughout the whole thing.
Exactly.
Boy,
you know, you could, and you know, obviously that's a very dated stereotype, but there is a real human characterization there. If you're in this backwards family where, you know, your dad and your dad's dad are cannibal butchers, really backwoods, and I think he's wearing his mom's face. It's probably not a good environment to grow up in if you have
well, is it nature or nurture?
and have a healthy you know, upbringing.
Exactly. And he's abused a lot too, so he probably
I wouldn't be surprised if there was inbreeding as well. Like, it's kind of it's probably a pretty harmful stereotype. Like, I don't know if there's a commentary on Southern people in general there, or if that's just
wow.
Yeah. There's probably
I like how that this morphed into, like, oh, it's, you know, it's not transphobic. It's just, you know, offensive to special needs children.
I don't really look at it that way. I look at it more so because of his upbringing, he ended up that way. Like, if he lived in, like, a caring family that cared for his needs, he could have grown up to be a better person. And in fact, I'm, like, considering this about a slasher movie villain in a genre I normally hate is, like, a huge compliment to the filmmakers and the writers, and of course the actor does a fantastic job of playing Leatherface as well. There is one thing I want to mention, though, that's kind of bugged me throughout the movie. How much fuel is in that chainsaw? Because that chainsaw, I've used old chainsaws before, and they do not last as long as they do in the lawn chase scene. It's a great scene, but the whole time my mom was kind of joking, like, is he just picking up gas and throwing it in the chainsaw mid-chase scene? How does he have this much gas?
Well, it is worth noting that, again, that was a real chainsaw.
That is a real chainsaw. I could tell.
So when they're swinging it wildly within inches of that woman's face, her reaction...
Didn't she get cut in one take, too? I think she got cut near the end of the movie or something like that. I can't remember.
Well, yeah, you're talking about, like, the later half of the movie being mostly screaming. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's effective. It's just the only problem was I live in an apartment with terrible soundproofing, so maybe listening to screams for half an hour isn't a good idea.
I don't think the words reckless endangerment were passed around much then, like they should have been.
Yeah, I think this film would have been an OSHA nightmare.
Oh God!
Oh, you could not make this film today. Like, no way, no how. And also, they were in an abandoned house. Yeah, they were shooting an abandoned house for a large chunk of the movie, and the whole time I'm thinking, there's no way they have any permits for this. They just found a broken down old house on the side of the road, and they decided we're just filming there. Like, that is definitely not something you could get away with today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lawsuit Culture. Thank you.
Unfortunately.
But what else is new? I'm curious to know if the main house is, like, that definitely has to be a house of one of the crew members, or like their grandma or their dad. But
I was reading, it's like a 1900s farmhouse that I think they came across, and I think they did get permission to use it. It's a 1900s one anyway. So
with that kind of
so even by then, it's like it is a 70-year-old house at the time they're filming. I don't know if it still exists today.
Oh, I'm reading something here too. Surprisingly, this was one of the least bloody horror films of all time. Tobe Hooper intended to make a movie but for a PG rating, by keeping violence moderate, language mild, and having most of the horror implied off-screen rather than shown in great detail. But, you know, it's more disturbing than something like Saw 2 or the Texas Chainsaw remakes or sequels because of holding back so much. Like, I'd say something like this deserves an R rating more than the remake. I'm not even
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
about that.
like the fact that the violence is just off camera and you just see enough of it implied, it makes it more psychologically horrific. Like, if I think about it, yeah, I guess you really didn't see that much on-screen blood, but it feels more raw and real somehow because of it.
Agreed. If I had to point out flaws, if any, like I didn't find that many with this movie, but like you mentioned, there were some very, very stupid character decisions. I just don't think I'm ever gonna see a horror movie where there isn't at least 2 dumb character decisions in the movie. Like, why do they try to leave the big truck near the end of the movie? Like, why does she try to leave? Does she think that Chainsaw is somehow gonna get through a metal door and kill the truck driver who's about 5 feet in the air? Like, why'd she just run out and head to another car? I can understand, like, maybe the guy getting out, like, oh, fuck this is a really nasty situation, but why does she run out of the car? And that scene kind of felt like the epitome of, we need to add more tension, and we need to drop the running time, so, and we can't afford to shoot this guy driving off, so we need to bring in another car. But moments like that kind of drove me nuts, and it's like, okay, now it feels like a typical horror movie again.
There was definitely budgetary restraints. I mean, the lighting, they were, as grainy as the film looks, they were actually shooting on a low-speed film to actually obtain more detail in the shadows and such. But that means that the amount of lighting they needed to capture some of these images is, like, exponential. It's like about 4 times, like, according to Wikipedia, about 4 times more light that you would need for shooting digital. I mean, obviously that varies, but we're talking giant 18K Fresnel lamps probably. Yes. I love the way that they film the night sequences, though. Like, when they're running through the woods through all those dead trees, something about that whole sequence.
It also feels like they're shooting at night. Like, it doesn't have that fake day for night feel to it whatsoever.
No, and I think they did. I think they just put a giant, like, 18K lamp on a crane. I mean, that's how they would do it today.
I don't think they even used the lamp. Like, it was pretty dark for the most part. They probably just used a couple flashlights.
I don't know. I want to look into how they filmed the sequence of Leatherface running through the woods with him, because his apron and his chainsaw kind of glow, like almost like they're using UV light somehow, and it looks very purple blue kind of color. Maybe. And I like all the dead trees that they're running through. I don't know. I found that
it's very effective.
You know,
it's also interesting.
All the dead animals and things, and the dead trees. I don't know. I found some symbolic parallels there.
Well, and it's also interesting that a lot of the horror actually takes place during the day. There is that one night sequence, which I agree has some fantastic use of, practical lighting and really cool, aesthetic. But almost all of the horror takes place during the day, which is something that you rarely see in horror movies today.
Let alone in 1974.
It's the idea that this can happen in broad daylight and no one notices. I think that's the horrific implication.
It also adds to the realism a little bit, because it's like this can happen anywhere, anytime. Like, it's not just here's the climactic night sequences where everything goes wrong. No, it's going wrong all the time. And something else that's really far ahead of its time is the soundtrack, which apparently features very few musical instruments and is entirely consists of a soundscape of what an animal would hear inside a slaughterhouse, which adds to the slaughterhouse vibes, but it also just makes the film so much more disturbing and eerie and just raw, and like you feel like shivers on your skin while listening to the soundscape in certain sequences.
It's very like low metallic grinding, and you hear some pig squeals as well.
And for the time, that's insane. Like, that's something films haven't really done around that time. Sorry, go on.
So, I mean, there are very clear parallels between, the slaughtering of humans here and then slaughterhouses, and people who are vegan say that this is like a vegan film. Which
this is probably the most pro-vegetarian film I've seen.
Oh, that's
since
the best work of vegan propaganda I've ever seen.
I mean, Rob Zombie apparently is vegan, and he makes some horror movies. So.
It's actually funny you mentioned that because Toby Hooper actually went vegetarian after filming this.
Yeah, no, I
imagine.
totally, that makes sense to me.
Especially if the behind the scenes stories is like, I'm
Yeah.
just sick of being around meat at this point. I'll just have a salad.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do think, and I think this film works on so many different levels, and it has so much nuance and subtlety that it's worth going back. It's worth exploring. I mean, I think that there's elements of, post-war anxiety and anti-capitalist themes in a sense, and this sort of, culture clash,
breakdown of the nuclear family.
Well, and also just media sensationalism.
A little bit.
Yeah, this film really surprised me because when you say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that almost seems like it would have this I don't know, it almost has like a negative connotation. Like I think
it has like a low rate exploitation, shock
like
value,
a B movie.
shock value type thing.
Yeah,
I think all the sequels and remakes of it probably have tarnished its reputation because that's what those films are, as far as I'm concerned. Where the original does have some subtle commentary interlaced in it, and it's there without over explaining itself. It's like there are some subtle things which completely is lost on any of the people who have tried to follow this up because they just take the aesthetics of Leatherface and Chainsaw and they make it more saturated and more gruesome,
and they just make it more of a generic movie monster too, which bugs me more than anything because you're just sucking everything away that made the character special just to make him more scary. Ooh.
Well, and I think, yeah, I mean, I agree that there's a sort of nuance and subtlety to this that is probably not present in future adaptations. It is interesting. The remake was actually shot by the same cinematographer.
But it looks so much more generic.
Yeah, and I don't know. But
also, Michael Bay produced the remake, so that explains everything.
I think what's interesting is that, like, the cinematographer might have perfected his craft later on with the following film. I haven't seen it, but generally, a lot more craft goes into them. But with that extra craft of setting up, large lights and softening them and adding all these little things, it makes it just feel more artificial because it's more professionally done. Where this is competently shot, but there's rough edges around it. Like there's times where they miss focus. There's chromatic aberrations in the lens.
You can see the
film stock is very gritty.
You can see the camera crew in certain shots.
Even the way they even the way they compose images, you can tell that there wasn't a frame guide or there wasn't they're not looking at like levels and other things that you see in digital cameras where they're giving you more exacting information on the image you're capturing, which can honestly distract you from the image you're actually creating. This feels like someone just looked through an eyepiece and arranged things as best as they can, and it just has a natural kind of feel to it, which makes it. I could picture myself there, which is really effective in this film's for what this film is going for.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Our good friend
agree.
Daryl Arrow.
Because it.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
We're all sort of talking over each other tonight.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm getting a bit of lag through my mic, so I may be a bit behind on you guys.
It's all good.
Yeah. But
Daryl made a comment here. He says that the cinematographer said that he was going for a completely different feeling that actually set a tone for many of the remakes to follow.
Oh, I see.
That makes sense.
Something he effectively did twice, which is unreal. I do agree with that. I agree that it's incredible that he was such a just visionary that he not only broke the mold, but did it twice.
But didn't do it in a good way on the second time. In my opinion,
I can't say. I can't say. I'm just going from like this reputation and just culture. But I haven't. Well, so I can't comment. But generally, with more refinement can come a more sense of artificiality. I'm just saying I really appreciate how this film was put together.
Yeah, me too.
Well, and also the remake wasn't the first attempt they had at trying it again. which was there was a
There
film
was a
in
sequel.
19. Well, no, there was a sequel which was by Toby Hooper and the original cast and crew, but there was also a film in the 90s which has gained a bit of a cult following with Matthew McConaughey.
Come
It's
again.
called Texas Chainsaw: The Next Generation. So
I have to look this up now. Give me a second. The
yeah,
next generation. This sounds like a straight to DVD sequel. It's got Renee Zellweger in it, and 3.3 on IMDb, 16%. 4.5 on Amazon, though. There you go.
I think it
4.5
did
out of
get
5.
a special edition from like Arrow Video or Shout Factory.
How does this
One of those?
somehow look cheaper than the film that had barely any money put behind it?
But it is actually directed by the original writer, one of the original writers, Kim Hinkle. But yeah, Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger.
What is this movie?
1995. So that may even be worth exploring sometime. Also,
maybe.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that a lot of the sort of sequels probably also, they also probably didn't do the psychological angle that I think benefits this film so well, is where all of the violence and the horror is more implied and less, in your face. Whereas I think if you tried to do this in an Evil Dead sort of way and just went over the top, I think a lot of the magic wouldn't necessarily be there.
Well, I think there would be magic, just in a different way. In the same way Evil Dead had it.
Evil Dead has its own kind of energy to it. Although some of the shots run similar to me, just the use of the wide angles was
the zoom
quite similar between the wide angles between the two films have a similar kind of vibe. Although Evil Dead's definitely a little more tongue-in-cheek, I'd say. Especially with the sequel.
Which is what Toby Hooper tried to do with Texas Chainsaw 2. So,
and that can either keep a franchise fresh by going for a different tone, or it can completely just fall dead in the water because, like, this isn't like the original. But if you try to replicate the original, it's hard to replicate the same magic. So you maybe go for a completely different feel. I mean, I think that's what Wes Craven was doing with New Nightmare by going meta and having a different kind of view of his material after 10 years, right? So
definitely.
It's hard to replicate the magic of an original film that did so well. It's really a difficult science to pin down. It's really not even a science, it's an art of just having the right set of circumstances and elements coming together to make it happen.
Yeah. Daryl Ailes is listening in. Hey, buddy, how's it going? If you've seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, do you have any quick thoughts to add on the film?
I mean, I missed the first little bit that you guys did, so probably just, echoing a lot of what y'all were saying, but
Go ahead.
I super dig it. I got to see it on film at the Highland. I don't know if y'all talked about that, but
yes, I mentioned that we got to see a double screening of it with Sounds of the Lambs, which
so
I can see the connection between those two films now because they both were inspired by Ed Gein.
Yeah. And yeah, no, like I liked what you guys were saying about the daytime too. I think it probably played in a little bit. I bet you they probably wanted to do some more night stuff, but with that fucking low of ASA film, you kind of got to shoot outside for a lot of it. And I have no idea what they did to do that nighttime sequence, running through the woods. It's always kind of grabbed me too, but like no clue, man. And they look dangerous as fuck. Like I'm pretty sure some of the blood on her is real blood because it's just so many trees.
It makes me wonder if they use like UV paint on his, like they just seem to be glowing. I don't know what it is, but I'm always fascinated with how they did night photography back in the day, and they didn't necessarily do day for night, because day for night is pretty obvious sometimes. Like the first scene in Jaws is very obvious day for night, but that film still holds up somehow. But yeah, I like that sequence of them running through the woods of dead trees. I don't know what it is about it, but it works for me.
Nice. Well, thank you, Daryl. What would you give Texas Chainsaw out of 10?
Out of 10, it's definitely like I don't know. It's like an 8.5 for me. It laid such a legacy, but like, yeah, there's some acting in that first bit and the comedy, and like, yeah, it just doesn't quite hit for me at times. But for what it is, it's completely legendary. I mean, that fucking dolly shot under the swing set alone gets it an 8.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah,
that was
and
probably
and,
done
and even
for
for
ulterior motives, but still a great shot.
Oh
oh, okay. It's funny that I didn't think about that, but it makes sense. It's crazy too because I guess they had to shoot it on 16 mil to get that low of a profile to actually fit under the set. Because working with film cameras back then, they can be pretty bulky with the magazines. But if you're shooting, I think it's a 16 millimeter E-flare, you probably just have enough clearance to make that shot happen.
Oh yeah, the matte box is probably just scraping it. Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of you gentlemen? What would you guys give Texas Chainsaw Massacre out of 10?
Oh man,
Well,
I mean
to
it's hard
me-
to
Oh.
put a numerical value to it. I'll just say my piece quick to Steven, and then I'll let you finish. But I think it is absolutely still effective as a horror. Even though I had some gripes about the acting with the kids in the first half, there's just some absurdities there. But yeah, I think it still just has as much of a visceral impact today as it did back in '74. Yeah, I think overall I'd probably give it an 8, even though it's not a film that I would go and rewatch often. I think it's a solid execution of this type of horror that has not been well replicated since, as far as I know.
Nice. Steven?
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit more generous than you guys. This film was probably the one film that honestly disturbed me the most out of these three films, and I thought it was timeless. I thought it was just an incredible film, and I mean, it's worth noting that this is a film that has influenced some of my favorite directors. Nicholas Winding Refn actually introduced a restored version of this film at the Cannes Film Festival.
That checks out.
Yeah, and Quentin Tarantino has said that this was one of his most favorite films, as well as his most one that has inspired him the most. In fact, he referenced the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a direct influence to the Spawn Ranch theme at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So yeah, I loved it. I don't think that it's perfect, but it is those sort of imperfections that sort of endear me to it. So I will give this a 9.5.
Nice. It's a great movie. Way, way, way better than I was expecting. It's not really scary,
Same
but
here.
it's very disturbing and realistic in a way that's not obnoxious. And the family and the abuse they go through is terrible, but so fascinating at the same time. You just want to know more about it. I'm with Devin. It could have used some better acting. I think my biggest complaint is that they're just non-characters. They don't get enough development, and they make some really annoying decisions. If they had more development and they were a little bit smarter throughout the movie, then maybe I would like this movie more. Like, seriously, if those aspects were improved, I think this would be like among my favorite horror films. Like among The Thing, or Psycho, or even Alien. But as it stands, I'd give it a grade out of 10. Resident Evil Biohazard owes a lot to this game. That opening sequence in that game is basically the same in this. If you like the dinner scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, look up the dinner scene in Resident Evil Biohazard, and there's a lot of similarities there. But Resident Evil's always been a homage to classic horror movies, so that's not too surprising.
Well, let's go to this next film. We're jumping way into the future from 1974,
almost
all
30
the way
years.
to 2013. Who wants to introduce this one?
Can I?
Go for it. Spoilers for Stoker.
Stoker is a 2013 film directed by Park Chan-wook, who is infamous for other films that he's made, such as Old Boy, which has been on my list for ages. People keep telling me to watch the damn thing, and I will, because, well, especially after seeing this, I'm even more compelled to. This film somehow flew right under my radar. But I'll tell you the story of it. So this is about a family named the Stokers, which I thought was related to Bram Stoker at first. Like, I thought it was a vampire thing. But This girl's name is India, and while the family is mourning, they're visited by Uncle Charlie, who has been estranged and has some weird interests, I suppose, toward India and their mom. It's a very insular, disturbing look at a wealthy family, which honestly I think is quite underrated. I mean, I don't know the reputation of this film in comparison to Park Chan-wook's other works, but I thought, yeah, it this film really impacted me more than I thought it would on this first watch. Um, but yeah, just the way that they do some of the sequences and anyway, what did you guys think of it?
Nice. So, well, you are right. This film was not very well received at all. It's only got 58 on Metacritic. I think it didn't have that much money put behind it, but still bombed. They were apparently planning a TV series about the uncle that they wanted to put on HBO, but the film didn't make enough money, so that kind of fell through. But
this seems like the plot that could have been like an HBO show or a Netflix like series.
Yeah,
and it probably would have been, more padded out and lackluster, I think. I mean, it's a very cliche plot where a relative dies who's very wealthy, and an estranged family member comes out of the woodwork and has some bizarre interests in hooking up with the mother and then also daughter. I mean, there's some disturbing things here, but I don't know, the way that everything flowed together was so smooth. I don't know what it was about just the way the story was paced out, the cinematography and the editing just had this cohesion to it that I'm having a hard time describing. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Killing of a Sacred Deer, although that film has some more wooden kind of performances. There's just something about this where it all flows together into a horrific kind of plot.
Yeah, it feels so unique in its execution, and it reminded me a lot of Cronenberg too. Like, I kind of joked with my mom and said, this film is what happens when a Cronenberg movie hate fucks a Tim Burton movie with a dash of Hitchcock, and you get Stoker. And I feel like that's the best way to describe it.
You kiss your mother with that mouth? Oh my god.
This is an R-rated podcast. What'd you expect?
No, I'm kidding. Here's the thing. I was not a fan. I think this movie is competent. I think it's well made. I think it's very well executed. But for me, there's a bit of a disconnect between the direction and the cinematography and the editing with the plot. I feel like the script is a little bit more self-aware of what it is than the film is. I think that the script is kind of this almost sleazy kind of like exploitation parody of what a Hitchcock film would be.
That's very interesting.
Like there may be some potential for dark comedy in there, maybe that way.
Well,
I'd say there's a lot of dark comedy here.
No, and there is, but I feel like, Park Chan-wook, he's a little bit too artsy for his own good in this.
Do you think there's a language barrier issue, maybe? Like with him?
Maybe, I don't know. Because I sat here and I thought, like, if this film was in French or this film was in Korean, maybe I would have connected with it more. But I feel like trying to translate this style onto a very American sort of film, it kind of fell flat for me a little bit, which, I mean,
there's definitely a very different sensibility to it. Like, it feels like a Korean film, but it just happens to have English actors and things, and it's weird how reading subtitles kind of lets you connect with it more, where when it's in your own language, you're suddenly a little more aware of how the performance is or the acting or something. I don't know what it is.
But I don't either.
And apparently Park Chan-wook does not speak English, so he had to have a translator on set to communicate his ideas.
Yeah, and I don't get me wrong. I mean, I love Park Chan-wook's direction, and I love this sort of style that he's going for. But trying to put that on this script felt a little bit tonally inconsistent. because, I mean, you have like this one scene in particular where Nicole Kidman's hair. There's a scene where they're brushing the daughter Mia Wasikowska. She's brushing Nicole Kidman's hair, and it transitions from that to this like golden field of wheat.
And I loved that.
That was a great cut.
I know it's a fantastic shot, but it felt so out of place. It almost felt like a perfume commercial in a sense.
Interesting.
This film feels very dreamlike to me. I kind of look at it with a son as a dream logic where, like, maybe it's not realistic the way things unfold, and maybe there's something that's maybe totally off, but it feels like you're in a dream sequence, so there is this flow of things, and things get into this fucked up way that you don't know how the hell that happened. I think dreams can be like that sometimes, where things just have this flow to them, even though logically it doesn't quite add up, or there's just something slightly off about it. Like there is this dream logic, subtle dream logic to it, not in a Lynchian way, but in its own kind of way.
Yeah, well, funny that I also kind of mentioned that because the score was composed by Clint Mansell,
your boy,
who did Requiem for a Dream,
and I think that is very fitting. Like I think he did terrific work in this one. I think Clint Mansell has done terrific scores, mostly collaborating with Darren Aronofsky. Like we said, Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain is probably my favorite one of his, but I think it fed into that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And it also fits like the tone of the movie, where it's like they love to play the piano, so of course a lot of the music, especially emphasizing on the main character, involves piano music. Like it's just little details like that in the soundtrack that just always kind of work when it fleshes out the character and stuff. Just it sounds nice. It adds a bit of dramatic tension to the scene, but when it fits the narrative, it gives it that extra layer. I kind of saw this from the it's very clearly a coming-of-age story, and I thought that's why some things felt so weird and so off to her. That's probably why the uncle seems so creepy at certain moments. That's why, like, she's very conflicted with her emotions in certain scenes and how she feels, and the horny piano scene where they're kind of
that's what I was
going to
say. Like, I don't know what it is with whenever two people sit and play piano in the movie, there's always sexual tension.
Yeah, well, it works. They're playing with their fingers, quite literally.
Look at that performance between Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper, where they're just looking at each other.
Yeah, I know. But here it's just kind of more of a intense scene, but that's because sex is this thing that's new to her. She has no idea how this works or how to feel about it.
Well,
so of course it's going to seem like this confusing, strange experience.
Also, he reaches around her back to get to the higher keys, so he's deliberately inching himself closer. So we didn't even get into the main reason of what's happening here. So Charlie has apparently been writing secret letters to India over the years that she never received, because I think he was at a mental institution.
Yeah, and the father held him back.
And the father held him back. When they finally meet up, there's a very emotional scene between them where he ends up killing the dad. But I just want to say the way where you don't know any of that backstory leading up to that, but the way that they cross-cut the present and the past leading up to this moment, paralleling with what she's going through all at the same time, I thought that was some brilliant editing. Like, how do you catch us up with some backstory without having a lull in the pacing? Like, the pacing of this film is just so damn smooth, and the fact that they're able to show three different, stories, three different times and places to add up to a single moment. I thought that was brilliantly done.
Yeah, and may I just say, this is one of the best edited films ever. Like, there are so many great transitions between the timelines, great cuts to kind of represent different emotions and feelings, and when they're going through the basement and it just transitions back to the main floor, but it's like the lights are moving around, so it kind of reflects what she's thinking they're up to upstairs instead of what's actually happening upstairs, but she's still kind of trapped in the basement. There's so many great cuts like that just really add to the characters in the story, along with just editing this film must have been a nightmare. I'm just picturing the slideshow that they had to use to put this whole theme together. If I pull this up on an editing software, it has to be all over the place, but it somehow comes together so well in a 90-minute format.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it, and I think they made it as smooth as they possibly could, and even the way it's captured leads into that kind of thing where either the motion of the camera is very flowing, or if the camera's static, the way the character moves has this flow to it. It just eases in. There's something about the whole maze on scene of how people move and how the camera moves with them, and then how it's edited together to keep that sense of momentum where the pacing just feels organic. It's amazing how much work goes into that, into this film. And maybe, I don't know, and maybe it kind of distracts from the storytelling because the way it's presented is so smooth. But there is something to be said about that, and I think, this took me by surprise.
I do agree. I do agree that it somewhat distracted a little bit. It's
a brilliant execution of a cliche plot.
Yeah, exactly. And I almost wish that there were moments where I really got into this film where I thought, okay, like I enjoy this, like I know what it's doing. It almost sort of reminded me of like a Zahler film, I guess Craig Zahler, in some ways, not quite as violent, but I could kind of see those sort of, the kind of stilted, bizarre, specific dialogue, and I could see the kind of exploitation movie influences.
But I think Zahler would be a little more blunt and a little more kind of brutal with the execution.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I do agree that I think he would be more, in your face and not quite as subtle as this film. But I did kind of pick up on those little things, and that was where the movie shined for me. But where it kind of failed is it feels a little bit too artsy for its own good, in a sense. And that's not to discount the editing or the cinematography. I thought all of that was incredible. I thought it was, very well done. But there's also, there's elements of this script, which, by the way, was written by Wentworth Miller of Prison Break. He was an actor who had wanted to try his hand at screenwriting and wound up using a pen name and got to the top of the blacklist, the annual screenwriting list of like hot scripts in Hollywood. And nobody knew that he had written it, but it was a smashing success.
So are you saying he broke out of prison just to get in?
Yes, no, but I mean, and that's another thing where, the script and the sort of style and mise en scene doesn't quite match up for me. As like, there's elements of this script that I feel like I've seen done in other films a little bit better or a little bit more interesting. The whole sequence where it's okay, she's a young girl and she's being bullied, and that's sort of her motivation. I'm like, that's Brian De Palma's Carrie. Now you come to, okay, well,
the bullies were just as stupid in that, in fairness.
No, I get that, but it's like, okay, we're gonna go into, she's using violence and murder, and we're using that as sort of a metaphor or an allegory for her discovering her womanhood or her femininity. Like, okay, we saw that like a couple of years ago with Raw, and that was incredible.
Sure. I think the film is good in isolation. If you compare it to other things like it, but going in without any expectations, I thought it was quite compelling. Like, it's a thing where the opening shot is also the end shot, but you understand the context for it, and it completely changes your perception. I thought that really hit home. Just
and I don't want to give the impression that I hated this film. I didn't. There were certain things that were a little, they sort of took me out of it. But
I will agree the script has some issues. Like, I think it has a problem of like on the nose exposition at times. Like, the most embarrassing example was near the beginning with the two maids going like, "Oh no, her mother died." It's like, "Oh, father died. Where's she gonna live now?" "Oh, with her mother." And what's gonna happen with her there? Let me tell you. It's like, okay,
no,
that's
that was definitely the most like on the nose like exposition where it's just like it's just we clearly see what you're doing here.
I thought it was just on the nose exposition.
I hope nothing bad happens.
Yeah, I know that was like so on the nose. There's moments like that for sure, but I don't think it took me out of the experience as much. It's like we mentioned.
Let me talk about a few things that I really did love about this film.
Go for it.
Nicole Kidman's performance. Holy shit.
Oh yeah,
chef's kiss.
I thought she was great, and I also really appreciated that she was not quite like, I think any other actress might have leaned more into this cartoonish sort of Cruella de Vil, like, mustache twirling villain.
Yeah.
Almost like a mommy dearest kind of thing.
Or just go way too over the top of the emotions.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And I mean, she kind of veers off into that a little bit towards the end, but I thought it was earned. When she's talking to her daughter and, she's giving her this stern sort of, this is where you stand sort of speech. But I will say that her performance is incredible. Like, she is pretty much always on throughout the entire movie, and I thought she did just a fantastic job. Again, the score is incredible. Clint Mansell, one of the finest composers working today. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things to appreciate about this script, or about this film, just in general. The other thing that I really liked was Matthew Good. I thought his performance was great.
Yeah, he's a little over the top, but it kind of fits. Like, it kind of fits from that, childhood perspective, looking into this strange man coming into their home. But yeah, he was like really good. His smile is just so creepy, because I kept thinking back to Watchmen and how he played the bad guy in Watchmen. Is like, wow, they just hired everybody.
Was that Ozymandias?
Yes, that was Ozymandias, and I'm just thinking, you hired this guy because of his douchebag smile, didn't you?
Yeah, right.
Everybody just wants that smile, and his performance really fit too. I thought Mia Wasikowska was great in this too, and it's a huge credit, and we'll talk about it in Crimson Peak, where they feel like polar opposite characters in both movies, like not just by how they look, but how they act as well. Like, she's very quiet, very reserved, and a little like over the top in her edginess, but again, I think that's also intentional. But she had like a really tough main role to pull off, and I think she did it exceptionally well. Like, the cast is like easily one of my favorite things about this movie. Just the three actors playing off each other is so. Anytime they have like dinner together or have an awkward conversation with Nicole Kidman were like definitely the highlights of the drama.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of an odd duck. I mean, it's a film that, I mean, yes, I kind of thought this too. It's like, I mean, I've got some, pretty decent scripts that I would like to think they're pretty decent, that I've written myself. Of course, we as creatives, we sort of have this like imposter syndrome, where it's like, I don't know if I've written anything good. But then I kind of thought about it, and I was like, well, if I wrote a script and Park Chan-wook directed it and Nicole Kidman starred in it, and you had the composer from Requiem for a Dream, like I'd probably pull off something pretty great too. It's like everything else was so good that it elevated the story, and I can definitely appreciate that.
I get it. You appreciate it, but you're not. It didn't really connect with you. I get that. 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was probably the case for a lot of people, and I didn't hate the film. It's just. But yeah, I can definitely appreciate where it's coming from and what it's doing.
Yeah.
I agree. I think some. Go on, Devin.
There's definitely flaws in the writing, although I imagine, and there's might have been some mistranslations as well. So if you picture Wentworth Miller tattooing the script on himself, and maybe not quite getting the words right. They probably had to
Yeah,
rewrite.
there you go.
Escape out of prison with the screenplay tattooed all over himself.
Interior. Wait a minute, it's under my arm.
Hey, no, I got it written down here somewhere.
Apparently, he has a prequel script penned as well called Uncle Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be one I would be interested to see.
Yeah, that would be very cool experience.
And also another, I was just reading some IMDb trivia, but it's interesting that Matthew Good's boyhood crush was his co-star Nicole Kidman, and so
must have been high-fiving himself on the way to the set.
Probably feeds into his character a little bit, eh?
Yeah, it works really well. It means he doesn't have to try too hard. He doesn't have to act or pretend.
There was also an interview with Jake Gyllenhaal that he was talking about. He got to do a love scene with Jennifer Aniston, and he was like, I don't know how to tell you this, but I had the biggest crush on you. Like, this is gonna be awkward, and he was just sort of preparing her for it, and she was like, we're gonna need a pillow to put between
Oh God.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what would you gentlemen rate Stoker?
Can I start?
Yep.
So I'm with you, Steven. It does have, to an extent, it does have some script issues. Every time the bully showed up, I just rolled my eyes back into my sockets. There's Mondano's exposition, and it is a little cliche, but I think there's a lot of elements of the script that worked, a lot of elements of the drama and how it captures like that childhood innocence and strange behavior that a lot of children have that, many would consider to be late bloomers, so to speak. And it's like we mentioned with Possession, and that kind of disconnects with foreign language directors making their first foray into like English films, or especially thrillers. There's just, I don't know, that disconnect just works for this film for me, and it really adds to the experience. And I usually hate like style over substance, but in this case the style really helps the substance to make it seem so much better and so much more potent. I'm giving this one a grade out of 10, but it's closer to a 7.5 and kind of lower than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But yeah, I don't feel comfortable giving it anything but an 8, to be honest. It has its issues, but it's a very effective, memorable film for me, and probably one of my favorite films about, childhood innocence. Even if other films technically did it better, this one's a little more rough around the edges, but somehow more effective as a result.
Well, I don't know. I don't know that I would say it's quite great, but I do think this film is pretty nice.
Yeah, he did it.
Nice.
Congratulations.
Yeah, exactly.
You're giving it the sex number.
Yeah, it seems apropos. No, it's a good film. There's a little bit of a tonal disconnect. I really loved the performances, and I thought that there was, some really good stuff. Even though there were some direction choices that I was a little bit questionable of. Like, I mean, the point where they pull back away from the phone booth, I was like, well, what? This is what you came here to see, old lady getting strangled with a belt. No, I'm kidding.
They make up for that with a very brutal belt strangle later on, though. You get to see a child get murdered. There you go.
Anyway, I give it a 6.9.
Very nice.
7 out of 10. I think it's a good film. I also admire it because it was dedicated to one of the late and great directors of our time, Mr. Tony Scott, who did one of my favorite films of all time, True Romance. So,
rest in peace, Tony Scott.
Rest in peace. Rest in peace.
What about you,
I must have missed that. I must have missed that dedication in the credits. That's interesting.
He was actually one of the producers, and if I'm not mistaken, passed away during filming.
That's true.
Wow. I think he hopped off a bridge or something too. Like, he committed suicide.
I believe so.
I guess you could say he died the way he lived. I mean, just looking at his movies. Yeah. I mean, considering that the IMDb rating for this is a 6.8, I'd say 6.9 is probably a very realistic score for this. Although For me personally, though, just watching in isolation, not knowing what to expect from it, it kind of took me back by surprise. Just the way everything ebbed and flowed together, even though the plot's very cliche, I thought there was phenomenal execution behind it, despite maybe some things lost in translation or just the language barrier maybe being there. Maybe some things don't quite get up to the heights that it should, but I don't know. I did still find it very effective and an overall good watch. I'd give it an 8.
Yes.
Great,
mate.
Very nice.
I think it's underrated, and I think more people should see it if they're interested in Park Chan-wook's work. I definitely have more reasons to watch Old Boy now, having seen this.
God, you gotta watch it.
Old Boy.
You watch Stoker on Disney Plus for the whole family.
And if you liked this, you're gonna love Old Boy. Old Boy is
you're gonna
way better.
Go
than
in
this.
knowing as little as possible.
Not the Spike Lee version, I'm sure.
No, God, please. You want to see Josh Brolin say "Daddy" for 30 minutes? There you go. Watch the remake.
I think this whet my palate enough to get into Park Chan-wook's films.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of wet palates and being thirsty, let's talk about
Crimson Peak.
Wincest.
Last but not least.
There's a smattering of this through all these films, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Ties it in perfectly.
Crimson Peak. Who's gonna
I got this one.
Okay.
So spoiler alert for Crimson Peak. It is from Guillermo del Toro-chan. The film was wrongfully marketed as a horror movie. The whole cast agrees on that. The director agrees on that. When it's more or less of a traditional spooky ghost horror movie and more of a gothic romance of horror movie elements to kind of help the plot along. Fun fact, I actually saw this in theaters on a date that didn't particularly go well, but I was really dreading seeing this movie. I was like, oh god, it's just gonna be a cliche horror movie with nothing but jump scares and no interesting characters, and I came away thinking, wow, it was actually more than that, and it was better. It had characters I could attach to. It had ghosts that wanted to help and stuff, kill the main characters. It was just such a refreshing movie for me, which ended up being disappointing for a lot of people, but for me it just kind of added to the experience and made it kind of underrated in my opinion. So what's this film about? As my ex-girlfriend described it, it's a bisexual's worst nightmare. Every character in it is really hot. It takes place on the aftermath of a family tragedy. While an aspiring author is played by Mia Wasikowska, is kind of torn between her love for her childhood friend and the temptation of a mysterious outsider played by Tom Hiddleston, who was setting up this clay mining expedition, and eventually, along with his very creepy sister, played by Jessica Chastain, begins to fall for Mia Wasikowska, and in fact, they end up getting married together, and they end up in this lovely, totally not creepy mansion, where Wincest abound and mysteries are kept, and Charlie Hunnam shows up giving yet another weird American accent. So that's Crimson Peak. I'm well aware this movie has a lot of dumb shit in it. It's far from perfect. Like the ballroom dance scene when they're dancing together and everybody's like, oh my god, they're such good dancers, and they're all applauding even though it's just regular dancing. I'm well aware this film has dumb moments.
No, wait a minute. They're applauding because he didn't put out the candle when they were.
Yes, they're holding a candle. They're holding a candle while doing the waltz, and they're saying that a good measure of having a lot of grace and finesse and skill while dancing is, can we dance while holding this candle and then have it not go out by the, by our movement.
Well, I must have missed that detail, but even then, like, the amount of applause was still like a little too over the top for me. But
I do want to jump in here. Guillermo del Toro, he's definitely a hit or miss for me personally. Personally, I think two of the best films that I've seen, certainly of the superhero genre, which I definitely agree is a bit played out by now, are Hellboy and Hellboy 2. I think if nothing else, those are fantastic films that he's done.
Oh yeah.
I enjoyed Pacific Rim for what it was. It was a little dumb, a little cheesy, but I had fun with it. And then on the other hand, Pan's Labyrinth was okay. I felt like it was a little bit more style over substance, a little bit. And then
I vehemently disagree with that, but go on.
Okay,
go on.
well,
let him say his piece. Let him say his piece.
It's been a while since I've seen it. It's probably due for a rewatch.
Watch it again, but right this time. No, I'm kidding. Go on.
Yeah, right, exactly.
You're doing it wrong.
No, and it's still a good movie. And then you have, The Shape of Water, which I think is arguably one of the worst films of the last couple of years. I thought it's probably.
I think Shape of Water is decent, but I think this movie's better.
I definitely
and underrated. I think this movie. I know the release of it was mixed. Very few people saw it. I know my friend Drew saw it, and he was actually singing praise about it, saying, "You know what? This was actually a really good movie." That not a lot of people.
It is, and it was a pleasant surprise. I really got into it. I did, admittedly, I kind of wished that there were more traditional horror sort of elements. I felt like there were brief flashes of that, but it didn't really go far enough. But by the end, I was okay with it. I understood what the film was doing. It's definitely in the same vein as, these sort of gothic romances like Wuthering Heights. And
it reminded me a bit of of Changeling and other movies like that, where it's a little more subtle, I suppose, in its horror elements, and it's more emotion and its storytelling.
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
It's still, it didn't detract for me. I had a good time with this movie. I thought it was interesting. I thought the attention to detail in the costumes and the set design and the production.
This
I
is
thought
one
were
of
just...
my favorite set designs of all time.
Oh my god!
But no production design Oscar. No production design Oscar. No costume Oscar either.
One.
Yes, because everything is hand built.
The whole thing with the red clay and being a
God,
very convenient place to murder people too. I mean, hey, that just works.
Yeah, it kind of worked out in the end, but yeah, like the detail and the floors, every single prop had to be handmade. Like there wasn't a single prop that was just like, here's like a magnifying glass. Like no, they made their own magnifying glass and put that in the scenery. Like the attention to detail in the set is just something that blows my mind, and easily, like, you can watch the film alone for the immaculate attention to detail, but it's kind of the heart behind the story that made me attached to it.
Yeah, I saw Jessica Chastain interviewed where she talked about working on this film, and the set designer actually hid the word fear in every single room of the castle. And so she was talking about how fun it was, like the cast and crew trying to scan every room in this, historically accurate Gothic castle and trying to find the word fear hidden in the walls or on the floor or something. And it's little things like that,
so
and that
cool.
attention to detail.
The writing's on the wall of how you're supposed to feel, I suppose. But, I'm not done yet, but I'm surprised Jessica Chastain doesn't play more villain roles, because she's very good at chastising people. I mean, I thought her performance was fantastic.
God. All right, I'm done. Good night, everybody. No,
you probably.
Stay tuned for Conan.
Yeah, exactly. No, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was great. Yeah, I really. There's not much that I have to criticize. I think, it could have benefited from a little bit more horror, and there were some moments that came across a little cheesy. With the end in particular, where I
think the last act kind of falls apart a bit too.
He comes back as a ghost at the end, and it's a little bit saccharine.
Yeah, but I think it earns it.
I gotta say, I do love the effect of the ghost itself, how it feels like it's physically there, but there's like these wisps of liquid coming off of them, and I just loved that ghost effect. It felt very visceral, very
It
real
definitely did.
in
Yeah.
weird way, like the way people look mummified, but also a little transparent. Like I don't know if the stuff in the clay would make like if you put some corpses in certain fluids, it'll kind of lift. I was reading something about how they were preserving buds and how they make them transparent or something. Not not for any particular end purpose, but it's just a fascinating fact. But
I will say the ghost effects are great, but there's one thing that bugs me. So the ghost, all of like the makeup and everything on the ghosts was 100% practical. Like even not only that, but our good boy Doug Jones plays the Red Mother. But unfortunately, the way they use the wisp effects, while they're effective, does make it look like CGI, and that kind of stuff always does bother me a little bit. It's like you have this amazing practical effects and these amazing like body motions, and Doug Jones again does a fantastic job like playing the mother and crawling against the floor and reaching out the hand in really creepy ways, but it looks like CGI with the wisp effects, and it does take away a little bit of that for me, but it's not enough to ruin it for sure. And knowing that it was practical,
I think it adds a little elevation to it, and if it's not done well, if it's not tracked properly, then it'll be obvious. But if they didn't have that, then they wouldn't look like ghosts. They would just look like corpses walking around.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
No, and it's definitely. I mean, no, it's not without its flaws, but I do think, aside from the Hellboy films, this may be my favorite Del Toro that I've seen yet.
Nice.
I really connected with this one, and I really wasn't expecting to.
And this is a good movie to appreciate from him. Like I think it then just was really didn't fare well when it came out, unfortunately. But it's so like well done. I think it's still pretty underrated.
Yeah, it's definitely an underrated gem, and I could see it being, maybe a cult classic someday.
Oh, it already is.
One thing I appreciate about Del Toro is the way he uses knives. Just where his characters decide to stab each other just feels so unnerving. Yeah. Like under the armpit or in the cheekbone, like really sensitive places you wouldn't think to stab somebody that are actually even more like lethal. And it just has this unnerving kind of sense of realism. It's like how Scorsese chooses to shoot people in the cheek or something.
Yeah. And not even just with the knives. Like when the father dies near the beginning of the movie, we've seen so many scenes where like someone's head gets bashed against a window or a sink, but the way it's done with like the sound effects and the way the head caves in on itself with the practical effects, like I don't know.
And the blood coming out of the sink water.
There's so much.
It was super brutal.
It's so much more visceral. Like there's something undescribably visceral about it that makes it really like potent and effective. But I will say this: how did Jessica Chastain get in that house? Because it's revealed later that she got into the house. How did she get into that house all on her own? You tell me this rich businessman doesn't have any security or
I'm also surprised that it wasn't that it wasn't in question before a certain point. And I don't know. I saw the twist of her being the killer kind of a mile away because it's like her silhouette looks like Loki. Sorry, what's his name?
Yeah.
I'll just say Loki. I like her, but I knew it couldn't be him, so I figured it probably had to be her. And I saw that twist coming a mile away, but still I thought it was well done. Although
I didn't
it was probably a little
too
brutal to be covert. Like she broke the damn sink. That's gotta be some evidence for foul play.
Although there isn't any fingerprints back then, so.
Yeah,
true, but just looking like you have a corpse on the floor with a bashing head, broken sink. Oh, he slipped and fell. It takes just a fall to break the damn sink. It took how many head blows to break through that?
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
Yeah,
think someone would be a little more suspicious.
Yeah, you'd think, but no, the doctor has to come around and save the day. The son of anarchy has to come save Miyamoto Chaska in the evil castle.
I think you have to remember that this was, for the time, I think it would have been very taboo to accuse a lady of such a thing, and that's sort of how she's weaponizing her own femininity in a sense. It's also
that's true.
That's a theme that sort of runs throughout this film is like she almost has this control over Tom Hiddleston.
Oh,
It's a very psychosexual, weird.
Uses her maternal bond.
He's got him by the balls.
Quite literally.
Oh yeah.
Quite literally.
He is very whipped.
Yeah.
But no, I mean,
watch me whip.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I almost had the opportunity to meet Jessica Chastain. No lie, but she came to Little Rock, which is about an hour or so away from where I'm located here in Arkansas, and she was promoting her film, The Eyes of Tammy Faye. I didn't actually get to go to the event, but I have some friends who were there. This was put on by the Arkansas Cinema Society. And yeah, I mean, she seems like such a lovely person. She seems very genuine. And that was one thing that I almost found funny about this film is she has to play someone who seems very far removed from who she actually is as a person, you know? And she usually, you know, I think this is one of the first times I've seen her play a villain.
Yeah,
probably the only time I've seen her play a villain.
That's what I was thinking.
And sorry, no, she was in Dark Phoenix. Yeah.
Okay, we don't count that.
That exists.
Who saw Dark Phoenix though?
I did.
Did anybody?
I was dragged to see it.
I have not.
And this film just made me think, wow, she actually tries as a villain in this movie. That's so refreshing.
She's such a
so
good
actress.
Great. Have you guys seen Molly's Game?
Yeah, I've seen
parts
of it.
She's phenomenal.
Yeah, she can. It just shows like how versatile of an actress she is, and I kind of appreciate these actors who normally take like the likable protagonist and try something completely different and just warp it around with an antagonist. And sometimes it doesn't really work. Sometimes their niceness just gets in the way too much. But here she just absolutely nails it. But I will.
Well, and it's also funny because Del Toro offered her Mia Wasikowska's. I probably just butchered that. But he offered her the role of the protagonist, and she turned it down because she wanted to play the villain.
Oh yeah.
So I thought that was even more interesting. But yeah, I mean, I had a good time with it, far more than I expected.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought like the romance between the main character and Thomas was interesting because like you can tell like he has to manipulate her, and there's so many scenes where he wants to speak up and say that like you're in danger and we need to help you and get out of here, and he genuinely like falls in love with her. It's kind of cheesy, but like it works. Like it gives the film a lot of heart and kind of adds some very interesting tension.
We are used to seeing him play a very untrustworthy character.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, very mischievous.
But here it kind of ends up being, you know, the better person. And the casting in this movie is so good. Like I think all of the actors do a great job. Not just Jessica Chastain, but Mia Wasikowska, even though a character is a bit of a blank slate, like I still think she does fantastic performance-wise, and Tom Hiddleston does like so much great acting with his eyes in certain scenes. He doesn't have to say any words to convey how he's feeling. And Charlie Hunnam's decent, but his character's my least favorite. Is like he's kind of just there for exposition, mostly. And
well, we definitely talked about this before with I think both Ex Machina and Lord of the Rings. It's like there's always a character in these sci-fi or fantasy films that's like your job is to be dumped exposition on.
Yeah, basically. But then we have another character that has exposition dumped onto them. It's like, this is too much, man.
Yeah, no, but I mean, yeah, I mean it's not without its flaws, but but yeah, I thought it was great. Shall we rate it?
Oh wow, it's a quick and easy review.
Yeah, pretty easy. I think we pretty much. Go ahead.
I have to point out, just because I love this stuff, and we gotta meet our 30% Canadian content quota. But this was mostly filmed in Ontario, Hamilton, Kingston, Dundurn Castle in Hamilton, and Casaloma were some of the locations used here, and I love that. I love that they filmed a lot of it here, and cool.
A lot of Shape of Water was filmed in Toronto too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to give the production design people credit, and they're probably the crew from here, who are all going on strike now against IATSE soon,
Hey.
or IATSE's going on
Hey.
strike against the thing, but hopefully that goes well.
Yeah, hopefully.
I hope it doesn't. I hope it doesn't become a mess. I hope they get what they asked for and
can't have another writer's strike.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Well, this is even worse because this is all the technical production crew, people that hoist up the lights and walk around with walkie-talkies and actually help do the film get made.
Oh, it's absolutely everyone, and there are several films that are currently in production right now. So hopefully they get together and give these people some break hours and a nice lunch.
Hopefully.
Oh yeah.
The only time.
But again, I love the production design. I love the aesthetic kind of choice of this red clay looking like blood, and something about like red, like blood red on snow or on pale skin just has this.
Oh yeah. And I loved the costumes. They're gorgeous in this film.
Oh,
they're gorgeous and they serve a purpose.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Like Jessica Chastain's costume, this like deep green blue kind of color. Like I don't know anything about costuming, but I can tell the people that created it absolutely do. And
this deserved an Oscar for costumes.
And no nomination
there's so much about this film.
No visual nomination, no makeup nomination, no soundtrack nomination. The soundtrack in this film is fantastic. I love Edith's theme so much. I have it installed on my phone, like as just like a playlist.
And I love the poster design, even just with like you see red and blue all over the place now, but this film really earns that aesthetic choice. Like they really implement it well. It doesn't feel like it's just artsy and exaggerated. It feels naturally created and placed in the worlds of the film.
Absolutely.
And it's also inspired by filmmakers. I saw Guillermo del Toro talk about this. It was inspired by filmmakers like Mario Bava.
Mm-hmm.
And
I got some Giallo vibes a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely inspired by that, which again I'm always a fan of. So
extra points for that.
Extra points, yeah.
This film is pretty good. It was my ex-girlfriend's favorite movie, so it does hold some sentimental value because of that, as a lot of other mixed emotions. It does kind of fall apart in the last act for me. There's some major problems in the script with exposition and Charlie Hunnam's character, but overall, like, the good outweighs the bad, and I think it is an underrated cult classic where the style helps out the substance, and the substance is just good enough to make the story interesting and heartfelt. And it's just a horror movie with heart to it, which was so refreshing at the time, and it still is now. So I'd give this film a solid 7.5 out of 10.
Nice.
Yes. What about you guys?
I will go ahead and give this a 9 out of 10.
Woo!
I thought it was pretty good. Way better than I expected. Pleasant
glad.
surprise. Good film. Yep.
I'm gonna be real boring and split the difference. It's an 8. It's a great movie, solid. Some elements should have been done better, but I do think the film's still overall underrated. I think it's better than Shape of Water. I'd rewatch this more than I would that movie.
Yeah.
Although not Shape of Water, I do think there's some great ideas there. Although it did get maybe a little overpraised, I suppose. It's weird when, like, the film that the director should have been gotten an Oscar nominated for, they get that news late and they just give it to whatever his next project is, even if it doesn't quite deserve it.
That happens a lot, though. Like Martin Scorsese with The Departed, or even the Game Awards when they gave like From Software an award for Sekiro when they should have given them an award for Dark Souls or Bloodborne. It happens all the time.
DiCaprio, he got an Oscar for The Revenant, but he should have got an Oscar for either Django or
Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street.
But, I mean, he's fantastic in The Revenant too, though, so I can't really argue too much.
Well, that's a conversation for another time.
I could see him getting it for Wolf of Wall Street. I like that Christoph Waltz almost got 2 Oscars in a row for Django. And for Inglourious Basterds and Django, playing completely opposite type of characters, and I thought that was fantastic.
Great range.
I see Daryl is tuned in, so we're wrapping up here on Crimson Peak. Do you have any thoughts? Do you want to say hi?
Yeah. Any thoughts on Stoker or Crimson Peak?
Just gonna open the floor.
Yeah. See you later, Steven. Have a great night.
Yes, I do need to get going, but thank you so much for having me. It's always fun. Before I leave, though, Devin, would you like to talk about the next episode just real quickly?
Yes, the next episode we're doing is Not the Bees.
Yay!
Oh, no.
I'm so happy.
That or the... I'm waiting between three of them. There's Not the Bees, there's the Troubled Waters, which I was just talking to Steven about earlier today, and the Rawheed Rex. I mean...
Yeah, the Real and Raw 666.
Yes.
You're going to pass up an opportunity for Nicolas Cage and the actor behind Candyman.
But Raw and, Kissed and there's a lot of good options here.
That's true.
You gotta choose something. We gotta do this next
do a coin
week.
flip.
I want to know what to watch.
Do a coin flip.
Why don't we just watch all the movies in the next few days, and then we'll decide on the day which one we're covering.
I'll pass on that.
That's beyond unfeasible.
Let's not.
Oh, way beyond.
Oh man.
Split second. Let's go. That's first thing that comes to your mind.
And go.
Bees. Let's
just
do it.
Yes.
Okay,
let's do it. It'll be a fun episode.
Daryl, you're listening to our nonsense. What's up?
Good night,
yeah,
everybody.
Daryl, what are your thoughts on Stoker or Crimson Peak, if you have any?
Thanks, Steven.
I've never seen Stoker, so I don't have much to say on that one. I thought I must have lost track of time, but I was hoping to grab more of what you guys were talking about for Crimson Peak. But it's good to hear you guys liked it for the most part.
Oh yeah.
I fucking love it. I love that house. I love the design of so much of the Victorian shit. The bats of fucking goo and fucking just the fucking
butterflies.
The aesthetic of the red and the white. It's awesome, man. And the fucking I love the stabbing in the face. I don't love the incest. It's a good writing plot, but you know what I mean.
Incest is incest.
Yeah, come on, bro.
But yeah, it's really up there for me. I was like praising this movie in 2013 when it came out. I feel like I was one of the few who got to see it
2015
in theaters.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be that guy. I'm sorry.
No, I missed they knew it was around then. But yeah, it was fucking so beautiful on a big screen.
I think they did the red underneath the white better than Last of Jedi.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, or a lot of movies.
I think Last of Jedi might have taken inspiration.
Oh, definitely, man. Fucking Ryan Johnson for sure. But yeah, no, I just really positive overall with it. I think it kind of led into Shape of Water really well. It was kind of the same kind of like folklore-y, like kind of grounded fairy tale. It's his bread and butter, and yeah, definitely big fan of it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for listening in, Daryl, and thank you all who are listening right now. If you're watching us later on YouTube or for our through Spotify, sorry, not for our podcast, because that's what's happening right now. So next week, as Devin mentioned, is not the booze, as we are talking about the Wicker Man remake, the original Candyman. Steve and I will probably squeeze in a quick discussion about the Candyman remake, because I've seen both at this point. And to top it all off, we're talking about B-movie. And no other introduction needed, just B-movie. Look forward to that next week, guys. And is it Tuesday or Thursday yet? Have a great night, everybody. See ya.
Do you believe in life after love?